All right, so today we got Just Fly Performance, Joel Smith on. It's, it's happy to have you on. You have a great podcast who I think it's currently 449 if I keep up if episode if I'm right, almost 450. And I'm a big fan of your podcast and like your content you post on Instagram. So today we're mainly going to talk about ice angle, but am I missing anything here?
I mean, yeah, I whatever I know we're going to talk about that and whatever else the conversation leads to. So, looking forward to a conversation.
Cool, cool. So I think the first question I want to ask is why do you want to start a podcast at the beginning?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, honestly, it was I remember the year there was two other podcasts in sports performance. It was Mike Robertson's and Jay DeMayo's. And funny enough, it seemed like those podcasts have been around forever from in my memory. But in looking back, they only started a year to maybe a year and a half tops before I started mine. So it was kind of, I don't know, it's just funny to think about that. But it wasn't like I need to compete or I need to, I was just thinking, well, this is a thing, and I know that I knew I needed to have more conversations with other people because I'm a very lone wolf type. Like I'm the type of person that I'll read Super Training and take a bunch of notes and not just say I read Super Training, it's a good book, but I will just pour through all the literature and try to make connections myself. But I really realized that that's only going to take me so far. Part of my weakness is the willingness and just to talk to their coaches and work through and understand their ideas, and that was probably another big part of it. There might have been a couple other little thoughts in there, but those were the main two, really. Other people are doing it. I guess I should. Did not have any vision for where it would go. And I just know I needed to have more conversations with others.
Mm, mm. So, do you think that like doing the podcast kind of help you grow as a coach more than just reading? Like,
Yes, at this point, I mean, all these books, I still read. Um, but at this point, most of my education comes from the podcast because
yeah,
it's completely curated. You can have a book
yeah,
and you you take from it what you can, but you can't, like, having a conversation, you're asking the exact question.
yeah,
It's like reading a book and asking someone the exact things you want about it,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so I still read, and honestly, Eric, I read more. I'm trying to, if you see behind me, there's like I'm kind
yeah.
of pointing. It's actually, you can't see, it's right behind me, maybe from my finger to that side of the bookshelf. But I'm trying to build out my like pre-1990s library, just
Oh,
because that's, if it, in my opinion, I think that is the most underread, underappreciated, underrated area of learning for performance, because so much of it now, it's literally just the same. I don't
yeah,
want to
yeah,
stereotype, but
yeah,
95% of it is just the
yeah,
same thing.
yeah,
People are repeating themselves,
yeah.
and there's so much good stuff. I mean, I was just watching, I was just having a conversation with the guy who does all my website stuff, and like he does makes puts my Instagram into YouTube and stuff and gives me ideas for YouTube content, which I'm trying to work more of. And there's this 1986 high jump training video. It was like a Serbian master coach, and it only has 300 views and it's 2 hours long. And I was telling him, I was like, this is so good. And not just the high jump technique, that was awesome, but there's like a lot of good plyometric pieces in there. And these plyometrics even are so good. These guys are still 20 years ahead of where I believe American high jump coaches are now. And I think it's just because we get so, I don't know, it's like there's this train of like common thinking and nobody gets out of it. And even when people go on social media, they go to find familiar things they already agree with for the most part, and then they just stay in that track, or they
Yeah,
want someone to explain to them familiar things they already agree with. And
yeah,
so I just, long rant, but I just think there's so much good stuff pre 1990s, because in track and field there was so much. It was almost like you had the Soviet engine, steroids, yes, but a lot of really good stuff. And then you had that branch out in the 80s, and that was really, really good. And then
mm,
I think it just kind of got lost in many ways. So yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the books I read now, and everything else is podcast. I mean, I read some other stuff too, but yeah, it's a lot of it's that.
I get it. I kind of had the same feeling because I th like you mentioned, I still read a lot of like stuff and feel like a lot of stuff. just like you meant, just repeat the same stuff,
Yep.
same stuff. But whenever I get the chance to like talk to like Coach Boo, like Dan Paff or like Lee Taff, they gave me new like not new stuff, but like some stuff I people probably miss or I probably miss when we do research or when we coach. And that came from like 50 something years of coaching experience. That like elevated me somehow. So I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so cool. Like to me, Dan John is the guy I love talking to with, and I would love any of those other guys too. 100%. You know, they've been on my podcast, love talking to them. But recently it's more been Dan. Hey, Dan, what are some books? Or Vern Gambetta, what are some
Oh
books
yeah, yeah,
from
yeah.
back in the day? And Dan will tell me about track and field omni books and track techniques and things like that. And Vern had recommended this 1930s book by Mabel Todd, The Thinking Body, that is referenced actually like Randy Huntington was into that book. It's funny, the more you go back, you see these like older materials that these older coaches reference. But I wonder sometimes, is it possible in the same way that there's no original movies, like for coaches to find the art that existed and then go a direction that the athletes feel that art, because I think that's so needed. So I could
Yeah.
talk about that. That's the thing I get really fired up about. I'm sorry about that, but
But
it's
no, no,
always
it's good. It's good because that's also I think that's also one of the reasons I started my podcast to talk to more people, learn more stuff instead of like just doing the same thing, reading the same thing, and still get published the same thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna jump to the main topic I want to talk about today is like the ISA angle. So what got you into like studying or like doing this, doing those content for ISA angle?
Sure. Well, I mean, it was thanks to doing my own podcast and talking to people and finding thoughts and ideas that fit with, I guess, first, how my own trajectory as an athlete. Like I was a high jumper, I was a narrow infrasternal angle, I was an elastic type, and lifting helped for a time. And then it just started compressing me too hard. And then I became a different type of athlete. And then you start to see that happen in the athletes you train. And things like as a college track coach, you'd get high jumpers or jumpers who never lifted in high school. You listen to the workouts they did and you think it's a joke. Like I had one guy who's like from Hillbilly City in Ohio who he would tell me his training. He was a good high school athlete. I mean, he long jumped pretty far, good 300 hurdler, really fast top end, super elastic. And, he's like, yeah, one day we ran a mile and this day we did like 6 200s, never lifted. It was just all like kind of longer, bouncier stuff. I get him. It's all power, speed, tons of lifting. And I mean, and he had a really terrible year, injured all the time. And that was other reasons too. He did not manage his life well. But I had other athletes like that. I had other athletes who I jacked their squat way up and they didn't jump farther. They ran slower. They put on a little bit of weight. And you get enough of those athletes through that you start to say, okay, like let's refine the approach that just getting stronger is not going to hit the same way for everybody. And you do want to get stronger, but there's more of an art to it, I think, that we take for granted. In the same way, I think before this podcast, I talked about coaching high school track. And you take for granted all these little sub pieces of the pyramid that if you have a college athlete, those little sub bricks are already there by the time you get to the kid. And they make it look good. And then you just have to do a few general coaching constraints and they'll do it in so many ways. I mean, it's not always like that, but high school, it's just like, I mean, you get kids that can't do a lot of very basic rudimentary movement patterns. And so you have to go a layer deeper in the pyramid. And it was that same way with strength. I have to go a layer deeper with the sub settings of strength before I can just assume increasing your back squat is going to somehow improve all athletic qualities unilaterally. For some athletes, it does because they have those sub settings. Some athletes don't. And then it was Angus Bradley who really keyed me in originally and it's just funny because now I see how the tree goes. You have Bill Hartman, Jamie Smith, Melbourne Strength Culture. I think Angus learned a lot from Jamie Smith, and it's so cool to see those connections. And Angus, I just remember we had this conversation. It was like save the narrows because a narrow ISA elastic can get compressed and shape changed a lot easier than a wide ISA. And so you have to be more careful. And I was like, whoa, that makes sense with my own athletic experience. And and being an online coach, especially, I mean, most of my training is online. I coach track. I'm a volunteer coach for track just because high school, like you don't really get paid too much. It's just I'll just do it just because I like it and I want more in-person coaching time. So, I have that, but working online, everybody is an N of one, even more than in-person groups because your literal like transaction is as an individual, what are all the little individual factors that I need to optimize? And we do that to our best of our abilities, depending on setting. I think you can do it in pro and college more than high school. High school is just like you got all these numbers and you do the best you can. Um, but so that's another layer because I'm like, okay, this is my job. So I need to be really, really good at everything that can play into performance. And I'll just kind of finish this with even just 5 years ago, 4 years ago, I'd have athletes in person and they're sprinting and I see stuff that I know is related to their bone structure, their skeletal alignment, and their movement strategy as a result of that alignment. But I didn't know enough to do anything about it, and it drove me nuts. And I knew that without being able to do anything about it, there's only really so much I can do with this individual. I can do a little, but I know it's going to be limited. And that, like, just irritation has driven me to, yes, more talks of people like Gus, Bill Hartman, getting on Bill Hartman's network. People like Alex took Alex Seffer's mentorship before I knew much about Bill, and that was really helpful. Katie St. Clair, and there's a lot of others. I'm sure I missed Pat Davidson. I can't miss Pat. He had a book that I don't think ever got published. That was amazing. It changed. That was a big cornerstone for me too, because I think that book turned into his coursework. I think he does seminars, and that's where you would get that. But learning about propulsion arcs and all this stuff, and so that set me on that trajectory. And so now I feel like every piece of training is not just training, but it also incorporates skeletal and pressure, and you can get complicated with it, but the goal is really not to. But it's more to understand, well, why did I give this training to these two athletes and one athlete took off and the other one struggled? And to understand that from, yes, intensity and sets and reps and more global stuff, but also, well, how did this impact your skeletal structure? And how were you able to move this weight or do this movement with a pressurized strategy, or did you have to compensate and use like superficial, like Bill Hartman would say, superficial strategies that are less efficient? So lots of things, but it's been one of my favorite things because it, kind of like you said with the artistry, it's like that's another way you can be an artist because it gives you more brushes to paint with.
Nice, nice. So I feel like we're probably going on the same direction because I also did Alex Seffer's
Yeah.
mentorship and I'm trying to like figure this ice angle out. So that's cool.
Mm.
So, talk to me like why is now I say like considered elastic and why I say consider like more powerful?
Yeah. Yeah. So the narrow infrasternal angle. So for people who are relative, I'll just explain to it like it's people are new to it. And I think sometimes I wonder if it's like because I've been confused. I was confused so many times in Alex's mentorship. I watch Bill Hartman's videos and I get confused. And it's it's not easy at first. And I always wonder if there's an easier way to explain some of these things. But for me, I'll just explain this as best I can, and then I'll get into it. But like the narrow infrasternal angle is the elastic type, and that would be, and like Alex says, I'm sure it's been in Bill's course work forever. But narrows do everything narrow, so they're narrower throughout top to bottom. They have a narrower infrapubic angle, meaning the angle of the notch of the pelvis, that inner notch of the pelvis is narrower. They're going to be a narrower, like even like hips a lot of times are narrower. Their feet stand closer together. And the angle of the ribs under the rib cage makes a tighter, narrower angle. Even too, and this is a little more, there's more individual nuance here, but like even wrists. Like I'm funny because I have a little bit wider wrists than a lot of narrows do if you were to measure my wrist measurements. But like my wife is a narrow. My son is a narrow, like very narrow on the narrow end. And you could just, I mean, their wrists are like you could easily get your fingers around the wrist. Whereas a wide, everything is wider. Their stance is wider. Their hips are wider. That infrapubic notches or sub, whatever the name for it, the little notch at the bottom of the pelvis is wider. Their rib cage is wider. So, and that's the muscular association. Now, um, oh, this is the thing though, is and that's the general, and that will get you pretty far. But if a lot of narrows, and I've seen this even just with a client in the last couple months, is as a narrow who has been compressed and lifts really hard and trains hard, and also I think mental stress has is a part of it. You can't separate the mind from the body and the psyche from the body. I think that's where a lot of compressions that we see also have the origin. I think it is physical, but I think there's also a psychological association, and that's another place I'm going. Is why are you this? Why are you in this layer of compensation? How did you get to end game so early in your life? You know what Bill Hartman would say, end game, where you get so compressed that you're already at the edge of your base of support or whatever. And why did you get there? I do think psychology actually has a lot more, and maybe that'll be the next thing that we get into. But that being said, if you're really compressed, a narrow can actually present as a wide. Because if you take a narrow rib cage and you smush it in a vise or something over time, slowly, 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 like a millimeter at a time, eventually it'll press out so it looks kind of like a wide, but it is not a wide. And so I'll see that with athletes who are really hard on themselves, have lifted heavy for a long time, who are narrows. There's usually a lot of psychological pressure associated, because if you're not getting out of it, it means you're not exhaling well. If you're not exhaling well, that is also a stress response. So think that hyper stress narrow who just try hard, the try too hard narrow, that will often present as a wide. So elastic, narrow is an elastic because their pressure system, they have more of and this is where too, it's like, God, there's like, so this needs to be an easier example for this, but they have a more inhaled spine. So if you look at their spine, it's more of an inhaled spine. It holds inhalation better. That ball bounces. You think too, you can do this if you sit, stand, run, is take a really big breath of air, fill your air lungs all the way up and jog around, bounce around. You will feel more bouncy innately. If you exhale all your air, where a wide is a more exhalation dominant type person, and they even have a more exhaled curved type spine, you feel more power, you feel more force and more downforce. And that downforce is also linked with the ability to internally rotate. Internal rotation and the time you internally rotate. So I hopefully everyone listening knows what internal and external rotation is, but even just think exhaling, going down into the ground is linked to internal rotation, and wides have a little bit more window to internally rotate, which makes them better at lifting. They also have a wider base of support. Not always. I mean, a narrow can be strong. I'm sure you have narrows who have deadlifted 800 pounds or squatted 600, but a narrow will pay for that
Yeah,
in their
yeah,
skeletal
for sure.
adaptation. So that's a brief example of how you can in your body, because I find I have to do these things in my body. I'm like, oh, that's why that is.
And uh, besides just narrow and wide, I know Bill Harmon also like have like different category, like not different category, but like I think he kind of categorized like into four subtypes. So you can have
Yeah,
narrow, infrapubic angle, but wide.
pylons and funnels and all those, right?
Yeah, yeah, and narrow,
Mhm.
narrow, like wide, narrow, narrow, wide.
Mhm.
It drives me crazy.
Yeah, it gets really complicated really quickly. I mean, I think the question is ultimately, do you need to know those for how you decide to train the person? Would be a big one. And I think a lot of it, if you're in track, it just kind of comes with the territory for the most part. Like if I'm training college high jumpers, I'm not gonna have a lot of pylons, what narrow shoulders, wider hips types, where you're just not gonna. So that's just you're just gonna train. You're training funnels where it's like the other way, and they're bouncy. So you do bouncy things, and that's where I would be interested if you are training a basketball team and maybe you have a few more pylons who are more like post players and they are more spinny and they don't jump. Like I think Jokic is an example. Oh, this guy's more of a pylon. And then the question is, well, should you have him do plyometrics or what? Honestly, I feel like just keep that guy healthy. Who cares? Like, I mean, so it's probably more that. But yeah, it can get really complex. And I that's one of the things I really appreciate about Bill is I think Bill have so much information. There is that artistry that comes out of it in those definitions and those archetypes, and it's really cool.
Yeah, yeah. So I know you post a lot recently. You post a lot as angle correlate with sprinting.
Mhm.
So especially the video, is it what's the athlete's name? Is it
Was it there's Christian Coleman, Noah Lyles, that kid
there's a
who ran
high school
that fast
kid you
40. There
post?
was yeah, that Iowa sprinter. There was an Iowa sprinter who ran a fast 40 at a
Yeah,
half
yeah, yeah,
time.
yeah, that guy,
Yeah.
that guy.
Yeah.
So uh so in terms of wide versus narrow, how do you think that's gonna affect like block start and acceleration?
Sure. Well, wides are going to be now again, not to say the narrows can't, because you have Usain Bolt, who his second 10-meter split. So you have your 0 to 10, and then your 10 to 20. That guy who's a narrow, his 10 to 20 was already sub 1. Like it was 9-9, his second 10. And I don't know if there's a point in my entire athletic career. Maybe the year I high jumped 7 feet. It was pretty fast that year. Maybe I could have cracked 100 in the flying 10. But this guy, I mean, that's with unlimited run up, and this guy's doing it second 10. That's so fast for this big, tall narrow. So narrows can't accelerate. But it's going to come a lot more natural to a wide to be a fast accelerator. They have a natural lower center of mass. They also have a little bit more window for internal rotation. And that helps you with the longer ground contact times of acceleration. So, relatively speaking, you have top end speed and it's tenth of a second. Track athletes a little faster, maybe. And then acceleration, you have closer to zero point 0.2 on step one, and then it's somewhere in the middle. So, you also have, too, like a wider base of support with a wide, the ability to do fast lateral cuts more easily with that wider base of support. So you have a lot of weapons there and you also have the more exhalation dominant. They have an easier access to pressure in those situations. And that's why it's kind of cool. Like you watch Bolt out of the blocks. And this is where, too, I'd be curious of Bolt's acceleration strategies when he was playing soccer. Like if someone would have videoed him and if he gets a clear step at a 3 or 5 step burst, what does his strategy look like coming off of a standing position, dropping down, realigning? Because he had it so down to a science for his block start because he got pretty aerial. But in the aerial, he really leveraged a lot of rotational
Yeah,
pieces,
yeah.
getting his body where he wanted it to, and being able to still use his superpower. He got to his superpower still pretty quick. That was how he could do that, at least amongst many other gifts and physical abilities. So, yeah, whereas a narrow, excuse me, I find really the first step, if you look at 1080 data, and I think it's like V0, like 0 step speed. Chris Korfus has talked about that. I think it's going to be a lot harder for narrows to have instant access to 0 step speed just from an exhalation, structural, everything's set up. For them, it's just how can I get to step 2 and just start driving in my superpower as fast as I can. So it just takes more practice for a narrow to really become adept at that. But then also outside of what really matters for 98% of athletes who aren't in track and field specializing is how do I do this in a game? And that's the thing is in a game, you drop from higher positions. You get to inject elastic energy into those first steps anyways. And so I think that's where we don't, but that's where the beauty of the human body comes in and how we just problem solve from 1 year old onwards, and the body takes care of that a lot of times. Sometimes I think we overlook at the 3 point because it's easy to assess. Like we want simplicity. We want things we can say, okay, here's the 3 point. I know what's going on. It's a
Mm.
lot harder if you wanted to assess things to say, okay, here's a guy dropping in to a start to chase a guy, and here's what's going on. And you have to just give it up to how the body problem solves and has been doing that for years in those situations.
Mm. So if we talk now, if we say narrow versus wide, Would would you use like probably 2 years ago's of Noah Lyles versus Christian Coleman?
2 years. Oh, 2 years ago, Noah Lyles. Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, even Noah Lyles now, still narrow. Like, still,
Yeah.
like, if you watch him, I mean, he probably annoyed not 90% of the people watching the Olympics with just jumping around like a fool, before his race. But he knew that's what he needed to do to psych himself up. I mean, I've talked to Ken Clark about his data, and his Lyles's turnover just gets crazy in those big meets. And I think
Yeah.
that's what he needs to neurologically psych himself up to get his stride rate to where it needs to be. So he's doing what he needs to do. It's annoying, but if you watch him doing pogos, I mean that's clear before his race, just pogo hops, ankle pogos. It's a very clear example of someone who's built to be a weapon in the pogos, and that's a narrow thing. So even though he's lifted more, gotten stronger, which has helped his acceleration, better internal rotation force and ability in those early strides. But he doesn't he's still, even though he's trying to have a low heel recovery too, he still has so many narrow
Yeah.
elastic things sneaking in
Yeah.
there. And that's where I just think too, it's kind of funny because you have different coaches who understand different pieces of the equation, and but you don't have anyone in there who understands, all of it. Here's the numbers we need you to hit for the first 10 meters, 20 from a stride perspective. Here's what your skeleton will allow you to do. Like here's your current strength in the weight room and various things. So that's where I just like being able to integrate all those things. But ultimately it's the human brain that is the best at problem solving, and you have to know how to feed it different things. So yeah, Lyles would be even now a narrow example, and then Coleman is a great wide example just because he can handle extremely low center of mass in his start, but he does it well. He can stand timing doing that. Whereas if you asked Lyles to stay that low with his hips, he couldn't do it, or it would just look you would call it a superficial strategy because the timing would be off, and then he
Yeah.
would go to superficial muscles. He would use quads longer than he would be optimal and all that kind of thing.
Nice. Cool, cool. And another thing I want to ask is like you kind of mentioned this swing leg window on the ISA post on your Instagram. So what exactly is swing leg window?
Sure. Yeah. So different athletes have access to different things. One of the things a narrow has more access to, and this, let's just say a narrow who's not super compressed. Like when Bill and Chris Wycus on their podcast, they had a good one on ISA, and they're like, okay, if we're making generalizations, it's with basically a wide who is not gone through all the layers of compensation. So it's not like a wide who's like just who squatted 1,000 pounds or something, or a narrow who did the same thing. It's kind of like a reasonably normally functioning archetype. So a reasonably functioning narrow is going to have more access of hip extension and hip hyperextension, to put it in probably more strength coaching terminology. They have more access to that backside window when the knee is behind the hip in upright sprinting with the torso relatively upright, because you could cheat it. You could put the torso forward and get more knee behind the hip. You see that in like rear foot elevated squatting all the time. In fact, if it's a strength coach listening to this podcast, have athletes do RFE split squats, especially if I see this is a super common mistake, is putting that pad way too high. And a wide is going to have such a hard time getting to depth because they're going to very quickly run into a bony block that their hip structure doesn't allow them to get around. So they might swing to the bottom, they might lean forward more. And to be honest, I don't know if they lean forward a lot, they're probably still getting a lot of good strength out of the movement. So no one's the wiser or really knows the difference. If they like drop down into it way too fast, that could be a problem. Like I remember, it might have been Lance Walker sharing this story. It might have been the University of Oklahoma a long time ago. I don't think Lance was coaching there. But it was like in the aftermath of the big Mike Boyle craze and moving away from back squats. It's like, we're still going to keep the heavy mentality, but let's just do it with rear foot elevated, or whatever. And if you don't have the window or range behind your body and it's just, let's lift the weight, and there's not patterning, you're going to drop down, you run out of backside space, and then the pelvis has to twist and turn to get that space. And so, anyways, that I'm kind of going on a little probably not necessary,
No,
but
it's good. It's good.
a wide has less space. So basically, as they are doing upright running, they have less access. And this is what's funny is a lot of times we associate elasticity and sprinting with like a knees up type thing. And this is what was kind of a whoa moment for me is I found now you can have narrows who do this, but I look at track sprinters like an Asafa Powell is a good example, who is more wide than he is narrow.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a guy who also is a good example. He's a Norwegian sprinter. He's not like elite, but he's pretty good. It's Matthias Hove Johansson. Those two guys run with a very you call it manufactured, you could call it manufactured, but a very front side dominant way
How
of
about
running.
Kishane Thompson?
Yeah, I would say he's pretty close. Yeah, I'd have to watch him again. I wouldn't say he's as much as Safa, but and I think I say that because if I'm remembering correctly, I think his swing leg operates a little differently than a
Yeah.
Safa.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could maybe put him in there too. I'd say he's probably a wide as well. And so if you don't have the backside access, but you also get pressure real fast on the ground strike, like a lot of those guys too, it's easier to have a high knee lift if it's a track and field situation. Versus some of those narrow guys, like a Lucille Tabogo, like that guy's foot's like flying up behind him, but that's where his window is, and that's how he can be elastic and how he can get his ground strike going. You could say maybe he might have to limit that a little bit to maybe hit the next gear, if he wants to focus on the 100, but if it's 200 and he does fours, then he wouldn't
Yeah.
probably. So yeah, so the what you see in the shapes of sprinting, if it's track, and this is the thing, if it's not track, who cares? In my opinion, for the most part, then if it's track, you may see more ability to get the knee in front without compensating and still be powerful. If it's a narrow, you may see more of a high foot in the back ability and still be powerful there.
So how does this swing leg window affects jumping?
Yeah. So the big one is single leg jumping. If you're talking track and field high jump, that's my first main event in track, and that you're gonna get a lot more narrows. It's rare that you would get a wide in high jump.
Mm,
You see
mm.
it in decathletes a little bit. You see some wides high jumping, and it looks kind of funky to watch these decathletes high jump who are wides. They have to kind of orient their body more, and they can still do it, pull it off. But real good single leg jumpers are almost all pretty narrow narrows.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
when you watch them like run and approach their jump, the foot kind of hangs high in the back. And I think that's a dual purpose. I think it's one, it's just the space they have, and if it's being a narrow. But I have narrows on the high school level, and this is where I mentioned high school. You have people who don't have all the pieces. And so one of the things we do a lot to warm up for high jump, and I use it as a differentiating tool as well as like backwards running, but how high can you get your foot? Can you do high foot and do backwards running? And my most reactive high jumpers, the athletes who just pop up the most easily, they have the most bounce off one leg, they can get the foot the highest. Even despite other compensations, honestly, like I have a sway back who can get her foot pretty high up there, and she's a really good bouncer off the ground. She's a good high jumper. Versus other athletes who are a little more flat footed. They are narrows, but they just don't have that piece. They struggle. And so you can have narrows who don't do that, but that's a thing they need to get better at to be better single leg jumpers. So, but a wide, they might just be limited. Like if you have a wide who's big and strong, they're not going to be able to get their foot that high back up there. It's just kind of, I
Yeah.
mean, not to say that it's totally a forsaken thing. You might want to do a little bit, but you don't, you don't want to dwell on it. Like that's not your power. Like let's do as the best we can. I mean, even it's fine. Charlie Francis was aware of that back in the day. He would wrote in his one of his training manuals, well, athletes who struggle with a tight swing leg, like keeping the foot close to the butt on the swing leg, they just need to stretch their quads more. And in some sense, yeah, I'm sure that, if you downtone that, you'll get a little bit more through there. But again, this was before anybody probably knew anything about this wave of skeletal dynamics. And I'm sure if Charlie knew about that, he probably would have had some exercises or ideas and thoughts in there on how to maybe improve that a little bit. But I mean, someone who's so I don't think you could have taken a Ben Johnson and really done that much to guys like if you squat 600, that's just how you're mold at that point too.
Now that you say athletes like high jump, they're more narrow. Feel like I don't probably even long jump. A lot of like long jump athletes, they're narrow. There's a few I see that's wide, I guess, in long jump. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a guy, I think his name was Jeff Henderson. Henderson is the last name for sure. Like a bald guy who had a sick standing vertical. There was a video of his standing vertical. He was the Olympic champion in maybe 2012 or maybe 2016. Nasty standing vertical, most positive he was a wide. But it's just funny because he long jumped like a wide, like really fast on the runway. Not great pop off the board, but he's just fast, and he's got enough takeoff and landing mechanics to still make it work. And it wasn't like he jumped like 29 feet. I mean, I think he might. I mean, a long jump has been on such a downhill. It's just so crazy how
Yeah.
bad. And then they're making it worse. This is just a track specific thing, but they're making it worse by doing a thing with the board where you don't even have to like. If anyone knows long jump, you have to. If you foul, if you go past the
Yeah.
board, the toes like an inch over, it doesn't count. And they're making a rule so it just lasers where you take off, and that's just your distance. And it's so stupid. It's the dumbest thing. I can't believe it, honestly. And there's people saying they're like, I'll be a triple jumper if you do this. And I hope they all go on strike because it's so dumb. But yeah, you do get a few wides in long jump of just speed. And then your triple jump is kind of funny because I think you may have a few like really big Cuban athletes. Like you've had these huge Cuban jumpers, not anymore. Their athletic administration is in shambles with the country's economic situation. They're all going to different countries to compete. But I would say a few of those guys were probably wide. It's like these guys are so big they're putting holes in the track almost or bending their spike plates. Yeah, high jump narrows. And then the further you get away with that, you might get a few other types in there. But still mostly narrows for sure.
Hmm. So if we talk about basketball, like what would you say, how much of this ice angle gonna change your training process for like basketball player? Like how much does it matter if we're training like a basketball player?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So I think it matters mostly just in the weight room. I wouldn't say it's kind of a thing where, look, like you're gonna go play, and honestly, even if we did stuff on the court that was like speed related, and maybe it's fine in the off season, but I don't think it's gonna make that big of a dent with the ocean of movement you do outside of that, and the ocean of movement that led up to all this, and how you play the game, and how you've adapted to play the game. And having good conversations with people like Ty Terrell is awesome. Yeah, he's been in the NBA for a while, and he is so good at taking Bill's model and applying it in the weight room to athletes. And a lot of it, especially on the high level, it's like, what do we need to do to keep you healthy in here? And so I think to me, just understanding wides and narrows in the weight room. Andrew Paul does an awesome job as well, and he's been on my podcast a few times. And I mean, to me, the most general thing is simply looking at squat depth, looking at your RDLs and hinges, and like, okay, like if I'm a narrow or if I'm a narrow, like a John Morant, like that guy should not be doing like 315 RDLs, really. I mean, you could, but I would probably try to not do it. It's like even I've seen Steph Curry do it, and he's pretty narrow,
Yep.
like, so he's like, you can, but I just don't. I think just because you can, that doesn't necessarily mean you should. And especially like, the real narrow bouncy guys, really taking a look at that. And it is funny too to think about even like a LeBron, like a lot more of a wide, and he has amazing longevity, but is part of that because he just never really lifted heavy, because if
Mm.
you're wide and you lift heavy for long enough, which you're good at, eventually it starts to stiffen the system. It's like a slow burning stiffness in the system. And does LeBron have this internal clock that says, no, I don't, I'm already explosive enough, so who cares? And I'm already strong on the court, so who cares? And I want to do the things that don't stiffen me up. So I'll just play around with like balancy stuff that feels hard, right? Like I feel like I'm doing and it's good. Balance, I mean, it's something. It's even like water bags and stuff. I mean, the first water bag I bought was a guy whose none of the other shoulder rehab was working, and he started doing a bunch of shoulder rehab with a water bag, and he got great results. So I think there's
Mm.
something there from a proprioceptives, just like a health and restoration standpoint. Again, it's a sublayer. So yeah, I think a lot of honestly, most guys are narrows anyways. So I think there's just like, how do you, and this is what I'm building really a future coursework around is how do you capture the pressure system? How do you have the least amount of superficial strategies? And what's a simple way to do that? But how can you get strong doing that? How can you plug that into everything else in the program? And so I think that's just the main place to start. Guys like Ty, I mean, Ty's been doing this for probably 10, 15 years longer than I have. I was just talking to him the other day, and he had this like three exercise circuit for a guy who needed like external rotation. And it's like, all right, we're going to start with this front foot elevated chop, and then we're going to go to this. I was like, man, you got this down, man. I got to learn. I'm going to get him back on the podcast too. So I think that, from a general, there's general perspective things, and then there's things that you can be a more of an artist at the deeper you go. So I think I've gotten pretty good at the general, but then I'm still learning how to fill in those gaps because I do get athletes who have massive losses in both IR and ER. And what do you do with those athletes? And it's not heavy squats and deadlifts, I tell you that. I mean, yeah, it's an interesting puzzle.
So when you say the like squat depth or like RDL hip hinges,
Yeah.
do you mean like if it's a narrow, probably won't do deep squat like that? Something like
Well,
that?
yeah, so I wouldn't do I would probably steer away from a foot flat deep squat for, especially a narrow. And it's funny because when I was in college, I mean, I don't know, like a narrow. Like I'm not like a John Morant narrow type, but yeah, I'm pretty narrow. And I did a lot of foot flat deep squatting, but I had my best success when I kind of almost went with what my body wanted to do, which was like a really close stance. I probably didn't go quite to parallel, but was quite close. Um, but the thing is the more there was like a time where that helped, and then eventually the next year I took it too far and I lost single leg ability, and I just started to bump up my standing vert, and then I wonder why I wasn't high jumping as well and stuff like that. So it's like some of these things are time dependent, and I actually think this a lot. Is I mean, a lot of athletes, the coach is happy just to get them in the weight room and lifting and happy about
Yeah.
lifting. And honestly, they don't even get that far to the point where they're really compressing and busting up their system. Now, I think in the sports where it's more, there's something like a clock, like a baseball pitcher and it's velo, it's track and or swimming, and you get like very obsessive, which you need an obsessive personality to some degree to be good. And then you throw weights on it and you have a malleable skeleton. Now you have a lot more room to make changes that aren't great. But if I get a basketball player and it's just like they just want to go play and they don't like, they're like, I like lifting. I'll hit some arm. I love arms at the end. I'll look at myself in the mirror, but like they're not like super fired up about the big lifts. They're probably not necessarily the type that's gonna hit it so hard that they really make those changes, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, I would still, I mean, you still want to give them the best thing, right? So like for me, as long as you have a heels elevated and a front load in the squat, whether it's a narrow or a wide, I mean, to me, that's like home base, because if it's a
Yeah.
narrow, they're going to be able to drop straight down. They're going to be able to expand the anterior pelvic floor, and they also get a little posterior expansion. You really can't do a lot of wrong with that stuff. And then honestly, same thing with the wide for the most part, you know. So that's, but if I was to say, okay, I have athletes who really do like getting after it, like track athletes, maybe basketball athletes who really want to jump higher, they're really driven. Yeah, if you want to go heavier and you're a narrow and we got our meat and potatoes of heels elevated, some early stance, yeah, maybe we'll do some heavy like 2/3 or half squats or something, or safety bar box, to a half box or whatever, maybe a heavier step up, a single leg that's like 2/3 of the range to full. Stuff like that. If I'm going to go heavier, I want to give them that in a range that I know there will be less superficial strategy happening or an ISO or max ISO, like an ISO push or anything like that. So I think that's just that conflation where I think that's where you start to run into trouble. And I do see that a lot where you have a strength coach, hey, we're doing back squats and bench and cleans, or whatever, and deadlifts. And they assume that taking that to the limit with all athletes is just what you need to do. And the thing is, it's not. And the funny thing is working with like high jumpers. The high jumper is the best example in track of the athlete who will get messed up the quickest. Because
Yeah.
a
So
lot,
true. So
yeah,
true.
yeah, oh
That
yeah,
is
yeah,
so true.
yeah,
They
hmm
get messed up a lot.
yeah, hmm yeah. So it's, but that's not your average, if that's your NBA player, that's like your slasher dunker archetype, but it's not. It's definitely not everybody. It's probably
Yeah.
a very small sliver.
Nice, nice. I like it. I know like you're busy, so I'm gonna let you go. Before I let you go, uh probably everybody knows your podcast and you're like, but still, like if ever is anybody is interested in what we're talking about today, where can they find your podcast and like your Instagram?
Yeah, sure. Just Fly Sports Instagram and just fly Performance Podcast.
Nice, nice.